What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my review of Baldur's Gate 3 in Early Access. So, just a couple of things right off the bat. Let me cut to the chase. So, your enjoyment of this is pretty much going to boil down to how much you like Dungeons & Dragons, the tabletop game, or the world itself, whatever. Really, your enjoyment is going to be how much you like that. Because this is an Early Access title, there are tons of bugs, there are tons of crashes. They will probably continue until they get towards the end of it and, actually go to launch the actual game. Because I'm reviewing something in early access, I'm not going to knock a bunch of points off per se, not to, literally there's a point system, because there isn't. But my point is, I'm not going to bash a game in early access for having bugs, because the point of early access is literally to give them time to find and fix those things. The other thing I want to mention is that, yes, Baldur's Gate 3 is turn-based, whereas the original Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2 were real-time with pause, or as I like to call it, active pause. That has divided the fan base a little bit. A lot of people don't like it. That said, most of the people I've talked to seem to enjoy it, or at least not care enough to really have a preference one way or the other. Personally, I'm fine either way. I've played both, I've enjoyed both, I've 100%ed games that are both. So, just to get those things out of the way, there you go. Now, to jump into the rest of the review, let's go. Character creation. Very true to 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. There's not everything there yet. Larian has stated that they plan on adding everything in the 5th edition player's handbook, but currently not all of it's implemented, but what is there does seem to hold very true to the tabletop games. However, it is in a bit of a rough state, as with everything else. In addition to things just not being there, some of the tooltips are vague and misleading. They don't explain a lot of things. I've actually talked about this more extensively in other videos. I'll have a link down below if you're more interested in my thoughts on that. But I did want to say that in terms of the feel of it and making the character you want to make, I think they did a very good job at that part, and it's worth mentioning. There are a lot of options, and I feel like you can really make the character that you want to make for this game, and I think that's a good point to point out. Moving on to the story. So, this is where things get very spoilery very quickly. Now, truth be told, most of this video is going to be full of spoilers. It's in early access, there are spoilers everywhere. If you don't want any spoilers, you probably shouldn't watch, the rest of this video, truth be told, because I'm not really going to try to point it out every single time it comes up, because it's going to come up a lot. Jumping straight into things, the story. You are abducted and infected with a Mind Flayer tadpole. Mind Flayer tadpoles begin the process of cereomorphosis or something like that. I cannot pronounce that word for the life of me. But anyways, it starts the process by which you turn into a Mind Flayer, which normally takes a whole 3 days. However, as you'll quickly find out, for some reason, you're not dead in 3 days. Now, your main mission at the start of this is to start looking for help. Find someone who can help you with this problem, because, you'd like to get this tadpole out of your brain. Now, as you find people who can help you and talk about this issue with you, they'll tell you that basically it looks like that for some reason your tadpole is dormant. Now, it does give you a sort of hive mind effect with other people who are also affected with a tadpole. That is to say, if you focus some effort into it, you can hear their thoughts. Now, once you get towards the end of Act 1, you can learn from a variety of sources that you are what they're referring to as a true soul. Now, throughout the Act 1, which is the entirety of Early Access, is just Act 1 of the game, you'll hear references to the Absolute and the True Souls. So True Souls, as it turns out, are basically people that have been infected with one of these dormant Mind Flayer tadpoles. Them being dormant still gives you the latent powers like I mentioned, however, and these people often recognize each other, again, because of the hive mind type situation going on. Now, it's worth noting that some of these true souls are not aware of what exactly is giving them these powers. Some of them are not aware that they're infected with this tadpole. Through some stuff in Act 1, you can, again, find out from a couple different sources basically where these tadpoles seem to be coming from. And then, if it were the actual game, you would go chase that lead, and that would be like Act 2, right? But early access, you can't do that. So the story is basically that you get infected by this tadpole, you look for help, you find out that the true souls are being infected with these tadpoles for some seemingly specific reason. They are dormant. People are worshipping these things. Some higher power they keep calling the Absolute, which the story's a little vague on, but obviously that's the point. What I enjoy most about this story, at least for early access that is that it gives you a ton of interesting threads and then kind of stops the early access there. So it's going to be really cool to see how some of this stuff plays out, because personally, I'm very interested in what's going on here. Because if the Mind Flayers just wanted to like straight take everything over, wouldn't they just let you turn into Mind Flayers? So it's very confusing as to why someone is doing this, so it'll be interesting to see that play out. Big fan of the story arc so far, at least in Act 1. And the last thing I want to mention about that story before we move on is that there are a ton of choices, either through dialogue or just straight up trying to do something without necessarily talking to someone, like say kill this character or side with someone without necessarily talking to them. It can go your way surprisingly well. And I mean by that is that there are choices aplenty. So you can pick choices that you didn't realize were choices, you can investigate leads. Again, you can kill people or not kill people for no reason at all if you want. And there are still ways for the story to play out. So they did not skimp on choices. And that includes up to being the bad guy or, say, trying to side with the bad guys, which I thought was a nice touch. Let's move on to probably the most contentious part of this, and that is the combat. It is turn-based, so personally, I'm fine with that. Feels very Dungeons & Dragons to me. Reminds me of the tabletop game, which I assume is what they were going for. However, yes, it is not a continuation of the real-time with pause or active pause method of the first two games, and I am aware some people have a problem with that, and I understand. Factually, turn-based is slower. They've made a lot of improvements with their turn-based system in their, the game engine, Larian's game engine. So even in turn-based, it feels very smooth, even in comparison to Larian's old games. But ignoring the fact that they went with a new form of combat, the turn-based mode feels very Dungeons & Dragons. It does not feel like Larian's previous games, and that was a genuine concern among the community. That being because Larian's previous games are very environmental action friendly, and that's not like what Dungeons & Dragons does a lot of. And they focused more on staying true to the 5th edition Player's Handbook rule set of Dungeons & Dragons than they did anything else, and I think it shows. And while there are definitely combat issues, which again I will post a video with my cons and stuff in the link down below in the description, where I'll go into that more in depth. Combat is not perfect, it's still early access, it needs some iteration is what I'm trying to say. Overall, I think they really nailed the feel of Dungeons & Dragons, and that's a really good thing. That includes having to take things like long rests to restore spell slots and stuff, which I think players new to the game are probably not going to be huge fans of, but for Dungeons & Dragons I think it works very well, and I was glad to see them implement that. Which brings me to the camp section of this. I don't know if this changes every act or not, but in Act 1 you get access to a camp that has a specific area layout, if you will. We don't know if that area changes in Act 2 to represent where you are or whatever, because it does look like you can kind of freely move around, judging by the map that comes up when you go to exit Act 1, if you were able to. So it's hard to say if this is a static area or the environment of it changes when you move around. But the camp itself is where you can end your day, talk to companions, see some events fold out, and it seems to me like it's meant to be this little instanced area where they can play out conversations with your companions that will go an exact way. That way there's not any conflicting issues in the actual map. That would be my assumption as to why it is this way. But also, when you camp, you can take your long rests and restore the appropriate abilities that require you to take a long rest. Now that said, we haven't seen enough of this system for me to really be like, yeah, it's really cool. But the bones of it seem good, where you get to take your rest, you get to talk to your companions around a campfire type thing, events will happen here. So it feels so far so good, but the jury's still out on this one for me. So that brings us to the role-playing of it. The role-playing so far has been very good. You will get dialogue options for your class, your background, your ability scores if you want to roll a die 20 on them like you would in actual Dungeons and Dragons. Again, just to reiterate, even in the story stuff, there's tons of options. You can really be who you want to be in this game, even in this Act 1 of Early Access, and it's going to be really cool to see that unfold and what the consequences of some of those actions are in the later acts of the game. As it stands, the roleplay options here seem like a taste test of what is going to be a 3-course meal, which leaves me very optimistic as to how it's going to play out throughout the rest of the game. Again, there's a ton of options here. You really get to feel like you are the character that you're trying to play, and I'm excited to see that play out as the game unfolds. So the last subject I really want to dig into is the world. Again, Very immersive, very Dungeons and Dragons. You start out outside of Baldur's Gate, some miles to the east of it. It's undisclosed exactly how much, but everything they've mentioned is very Dungeons and Dragons. They stuck hard to the lore, and it works out really well. You get to encounter the Mind Flayers first thing. They are their scary, tentacle-faced, mind-flaying action guys that they always came across as in the tabletop games. While fleeing it initially in the prologue area, you get to experience Avernus, which is the first layer of hell, which was really cool. Big fan of that. When the Nautiloid, which is the Mind Flayer ship, eventually crashes outside of Baldur's Gate, you get to run into companions, you get to talk to druids of a grove who are having a conflict with tieflings nearby, tieflings being a half-demon race of Dungeons and Dragons. You get to encounter things like owlbears, which again they stuck to the lore, and that's probably one of the more notable encounters. It's really fun. You can actually encounter a hag, which I think they did tremendously well. My favorite part about this hag is that they wrote this character for exactly what I would imagine a hag to act like, and you can make a deal with her that doesn't help you at all per se, but it's really cool. They stuck to what hags were supposed to be, and they do that in pretty much every respect. In fact, probably the single best thing I can say about Baldur's Gate 3 Early Access is it feels so much like Dungeons and Dragons in a modern game. And honestly, I'm a huge fan of that part of it. The world building they do is top notch. Now, that said, with any and all games, there are inevitably things that I am not a huge fan of. I compiled those in a video called Things for Baldur's Gate 3 to Improve. I will put a link to that description where I will talk, actually a bit longer than this video I think, about the cons for this early access. So if you want to hear my thoughts on those and not just things I enjoyed about specific parts of the game, to balance this out, by all means, click that link and you can hear some of the things I found less than favorable about the game in a more detailed fashion. And last but not least, before we go, the companions or the origin characters. At some point, you will be able to play as them, should you so choose, but right now they can only be in your party, and you are forced to play a custom character. Now, I am not a fan of many of them. I think Gale is the only one with a truly good story. He is the wizard. And the other four, Asterion, the vampire spawn, Will, the kind of swordsman, Blade of the Frontiers guy, Lae'zel, the Githyanki warrior, and Shadowheart, the cleric of Shar, the goddess of darkness and secrets. Honestly, all of them were a little underwhelming. I hope that the rest of the game kind of plays it out better and that they iterate on some of the companions' dialogue. Because right now, while the stories of these characters themselves can be interesting, the characters themselves aren't well written, in my opinion. The best example of that I can give you right here, so I don't chew your guys' ear off, is simply that Lae'zel, the Githyanki warrior, for instance, you can choose to basically not side with this Githyanki warrior throughout the Act 1 story, and she'll be like, hey, I hate Mind Flayers because I'm Githyanki, and that's a whole thing with Dungeons and Dragons. And the fact that you keep accepting side quests is irking me because we have Mind Flayer tadpoles in our heads, and I want that to be the priority. Which is fair enough. Very true to form for what a Githyanki is. But you can basically argue with her the entire time, and then out of nowhere, at the end of Act 1, during a celebration at your camp, you can talk to Lae'zel, and she'll be like, it's too bad you didn't side with me on more stuff. We could be banging right now. And it's just like, what? Who is that for? Like, if I'm clearly arguing with you and not getting along with this character the entire time up to this point, in what way is it realistic for that character to be like, if we were better friends, we'd be banging right now? Like, that does not make sense. It's just so out of place, it genuinely bothers me. And most of the companions besides Gale have something like that, and it just annoys the crap out of me. Gale, though, is actually pretty well done. While he's not the most interesting guy in the world in terms of story, his does seem to be the most coherent and interesting, which kind of makes him stand out by default. There you go, guys. A review of Baldur's Gate 3 in Early Access. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember, if you want to hear the things I didn't like too much about the video, click the link in the description below. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom, and have an amazing day.